Something about that night has never made sense. A little girl, asleep in her bed at 2:30 in the morning. And then, before the sun came up, gone. No scream, no sign of struggle, no explanation anyone has ever been able to give. Just a child who walked out into the dark. Her name was Asha Degree. She was 9 years old, and on Valentine's Day 2000, she vanished from a small town in North Carolina in a way that no one, not her family, not law enforcement, not the FBI, has ever fully been able to explain. This is her story. Shelby, North Carolina sits in Cleveland County, tucked into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a quiet town, the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where children ride bikes on summer evenings and everyone turns up for Friday night basketball. Asha Degree grew up there. She was a fourth grader at Falston Elementary School, and by all accounts, she was exactly the kind of kid you remember, lighthearted, funny. She wore her hair in pigtails and ponytails, and she had a way of making friends without even trying. But the thing Asha loved most was basketball. She played for her school team, the Falston Elementary Bulldogs, and she was good. Not just good for her age. She was considered one of the standout players on the team, competitive and focused in a way that didn't always come naturally to 9-year-olds. Her family was close. Her parents, Harold and Aquila, worked steady jobs. Harold loaded freight at Pittsburgh Plate Glass. Aquila worked at a piano manufacturing plant called Kauai America. They were a working family, grounded, involved, present. Asha and her older brother O'Brien shared a bedroom, and the two of them were described as inseparable. By every measure, Asha had a normal, happy life. But 2 days before she disappeared, something happened that seemed to shake her. It was a basketball game, and it mattered to her in the way that only a child who truly loves something can understand. Asha fouled out. Her team, the Bulldogs, lost by a single point. For a 9-year-old who lived and breathed the sport, that kind of loss can feel enormous. Her mother described it as devastating for Asha, the kind of moment that stays with you. The next morning, the family went to church together, and according to her parents, Asha seemed fine. She was back to herself, laughing, engaged, present. Whatever she had been feeling the night before appeared to have passed. Nobody in that family had any idea that in less than 24 hours, their daughter would be gone. The night of February 13th, 2000, moved quietly into the early hours of Valentine's Day. At around 2:30 in the morning, Asha's father Harold got up and checked on the children. He walked to the bedroom. Both Asha and O'Brien were asleep in their beds. He went back to his room. At 6:15 in the morning, Harold and Aquila woke up and discovered that Asha was not in the house. Her book bag was gone too. In between those two moments, a gap of less than 4 hours, a 9-year-old girl had gotten up in the middle of the night, packed a bag, and walked out of her family's home into heavy rain and blustering wind. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. Nothing had been broken or disturbed. Nobody had heard a sound. She left on her own 2 feet. That much investigators were certain of. What they could not tell you, then or now, was why. At approximately 4 in the morning, while most of Shelby was still asleep, 2 separate truck drivers noticed something unusual on Highway 18. A young girl, walking alone on the side of the road in the dark. Both drivers described her in ways consistent with Asha's appearance. At that point, investigators later calculated she would have been roughly 1 mile from her home. Think about that for a moment. A 9-year-old child, alone on a highway, in the rain, at 4 in the morning. At least one of those drivers turned around. They were concerned, rightly so, about a small child out there in those conditions. They came back to check on her. But when the driver returned, Asha had turned and run into the woods. That was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree. When that driver looked into the darkness of those trees, she was already gone. The search began that morning as soon as the missing persons report was filed. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation responded. The FBI was brought in. Hundreds of community volunteers joined law enforcement in the search. People from all over Cleveland County who knew Asha, or who simply couldn't imagine a child out there alone, and did what people do in small towns when one of their own goes missing. They searched. They called her name. They covered land. They followed every lead they could find. Search dogs were brought in. But there was no meaningful scent trail. The rain that had been falling all night had done its work. Tips began coming in. People who had been driving Highway 18 in the early morning hours called to report that they too had seen a small girl walking by the road. The sightings aligned. Investigators were confident they were tracking Asha's movements, at least as far as the road went. Beyond that point, silence. In March 2000, a full-size billboard was erected along Highway 18, near the last place she was seen. Asha's face looked out over that stretch of highway for years. The town gave her a name that summer. They called her Shelby's sweetheart. Her mother, Euharlee, stood in front of cameras and told the world she believed her daughter was still alive. She said it then, and she has never stopped saying it. The case went quiet in the way that cold cases do. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The leads that had once seemed promising eventually ran cold, and Asha remained missing. A face on a billboard, a name people said in hushed tones, a mystery without an answer. Then, in August 2001, a year and a half after Asha vanished, something was found. Construction workers working off Highway 18 in Burke County made an unexpected discovery. Buried in the ground was a book bag, wrapped in 2 black trash bags, concealed beneath the earth approximately 26 miles north of Shelby. It was Asha's, and what investigators found inside that bag raised more questions than it answered. 2 items were found inside the book bag that did not belong to Asha. The first was a New Kids on the Block concert t-shirt. The second was a copy of a Dr. Seuss book, McElligot's Pool, which had been checked out from the library at Asha's school. Neither of these items had been in Asha's possession before the night she disappeared. Neither could be explained by her family. Forensic testing was conducted on those items over the years that followed. Eventually, DNA results came back that linked the t-shirt and the book to specific individuals. One of them was a woman named Annalee Dedman Ramirez. The other was a man named Russell Bradley Underhill. Those names, particularly the name Dedman, would eventually become central to the investigation. But it would take years before investigators were ready to speak publicly about what they believed had happened. In 2014, a retired detective named Tim Adams came back out of retirement to lead the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office investigation into Asha's case. That decision signaled something. When law enforcement calls in someone who has already stepped away from the job, it usually means they believe there is something worth pursuing. Adams became one of the most visible and most vocal investigators associated with the case. He gave interviews. He made appeals. He asked anyone with information to come forward. And quietly, over the years that followed, the investigation deepened in ways the public wouldn't fully understand until much later. By 2017, investigators had begun conducting formal interviews at a pace that had not been seen since the early days of the case. In the years that followed, they would conduct approximately 300 interviews. 300. That is not a cold case being left to gather dust. That is an active investigation pushing forward, methodically, carefully, piece by piece. Something was coming together. To understand what investigators eventually built their case around, you need to know about a family from Cleveland County. The Dedmans. Roy Dedman was a local man. In February 2000, he had 3 daughters: Lizzie, who was 16 at the time, Sarah, who was 15, and Anna Lee, who was 13. For most of the years following Asha's disappearance, the Dedman family was not a name the public associated with the case. But behind closed doors, investigators had been paying attention. The DNA connection to Anna Lee Dedman Ramirez, through items found buried inside Asha's book bag, was one piece. But it wasn't the only one. In 2024, investigators announced publicly that they were focusing on the Dedman family. A vehicle was seized from a property in Shelby, described as having features closely matching a car that investigators had long believed was connected to Asha's disappearance. That vehicle had been a point of interest for years. From very early in the investigation, witnesses had described seeing a dark green vintage vehicle in the area around the time Asha was last seen. The FBI had put out information about the car, describing it as possibly a Ford Thunderbird or a Lincoln Mark IV from the 1970s. For a long time, that vehicle was one of the most important unanswered questions in the case. Where was it? Who did it belong to? Then, in 2024, a 1964 AMC Rambler was seized from a property connected to the Dedman family. Investigators said it had features consistent with the vehicle that had been sought for over 2 decades. They also seized a second piece of evidence in 2024 that changed the shape of the investigation. A witness came forward. He said that sometime in the mid-2000s, at a party, he had been present when Lizzie Foster, Roy Dedman's oldest daughter, had broken down in tears. According to this witness, Lizzie made a statement that she had killed Asha Degree. And according to the same witness, as soon as the words were out of Lizzie's mouth, her sister told her to stop talking. The attorneys for the Dedman family have denied any connection to Asha's disappearance. No charges have been filed. It is important to say that clearly. Everything investigators have presented publicly is based on search warrant documents and their stated theories. The Dedmans maintain their innocence. But the direction of the investigation is not difficult to read. In February 2025, 25 years after Asha walked out into the dark, new search warrants were executed. Cell phones belonging to Roy Dedman, Lizzie Foster, and Sarah Capel were seized. The warrants reference text messages described as potentially significant to the investigation. The case is moving, slowly, carefully, but moving. Now, There is a question that has sat at the center of this case from the very beginning. Why did Asha leave? It is the question that investigators have never been able to fully answer. And it is the question that makes this case unlike almost any other missing child case in American history. She was 9 years old. She was not a teenager with reasons to run. She had no history of disappearing. There were no signs of abuse in the home. No ongoing family conflict. Nothing that would give a fourth grader a reason to pack her bag in the middle of the night and walk out into the rain. Investigators who studied the contents of her book bag said it looked like something a child had packed herself, deliberately, with some kind of plan in mind. She had chosen what to bring. She had thought about it, which means that in the days before she disappeared, Asha Degree had been preparing for something. What that something was, who she was going to, or what she believed was waiting for her, no one has ever publicly confirmed. But consider what we know. She was 9. She walked out alone at around 3 or 4 in the morning. She walked in rain and wind on a highway in the dark. Not a child stumbling blindly through the night, but a child moving with purpose. And when a concerned adult stopped to check on her, she ran. She ran away from someone trying to help her. That detail has never left investigators. And it has never left the people who follow this case. Was she afraid? Had someone told her not to trust strangers? Was she running towards someone she knew and making sure no one could stop her from getting there? Or had she already encountered something, seen something, and was running from it? We don't know. That's the honest answer. We simply don't know. There are a few theories that investigators and observers have held on to over the years, and it's worth walking through them. The first is that Asha made contact with someone before she left. That in the days or even weeks before Valentine's Day, someone reached out to her, someone she trusted, someone who convinced her that meeting them in the early hours of the morning was safe. The deliberate packing, the early hour, the chosen route, all of it suggests a child with a destination in mind, not a child simply wandering. Whether that contact was made in person, through a note, through a phone, through someone at school, investigators have never publicly said. But the idea that someone had been communicating with Asha before she left is something that law enforcement has not dismissed. The second theory is more direct, that Asha was on the road, walking, alone and vulnerable, and that someone she did not know drove past, saw her, and took her. A crime of opportunity, a child in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the buried book bag complicates that. The foreign DNA complicates that. The level of concealment, 26 miles away, wrapped in trash bags, buried underground, suggests planning. It suggests someone who knew what they were doing and had the means and the time to do it properly. That is not the profile of an impulsive abduction. The third possibility, and the one that investigators have leaned into most heavily in recent years, is that Asha's disappearance was connected to people who knew her community. People who understood the roads, the area, the local geography. People who had a car matching the one witnesses described. People whose DNA turned up inside a buried book bag 26 miles from the last place she was seen. Whether that theory will ever be confirmed in a courtroom remains to be seen. In 2024, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office made an announcement that had been a long time coming. They said, for the first time publicly, that they believe Asha Degree was a victim of homicide. They said they believe her body was concealed. Those two statements changed everything, not because they told us anything that many investigators hadn't quietly believed for years, but because they said it out loud. Officially. On the record. Asha's mother Euharlee has always said her daughter is alive, and no parent should ever be asked to stop holding on to that belief. That hope belongs to her, and it always will. But law enforcement, after 24 years of searching, has arrived at a different conclusion. They believe Asha is gone, and they believe someone took her. The reward for information in this case now stands at $100,000 in total, $75,000 from the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, and an additional $25,000 from the governor of North Carolina. That is not a symbolic gesture. That is a serious offer, aimed at someone who knows something and hasn't spoken. Investigators have conducted around 300 interviews since 2017 alone. The FBI remains involved. The North Carolina SBI remains involved. New warrants are still being served. New evidence is still being gathered. This is not a case that has been set aside. There's something about this story that stays with you. Maybe it's because she was 9. Maybe it's because Valentine's Day should never be associated with anything like this. Maybe it's because the image of a little girl in pigtails walking alone on a dark highway in the rain, moving toward something no one else could see, is the kind of thing you can't easily let go of. Asha Degree packed a bag. She got up before the sun. She walked out into a night that was cold and wet and dark. And somewhere on that road, or in those woods, something happened to her. Someone knows what it was. Someone has always known. The investigators who have worked this case for 25 years have not forgotten her. The town of Shelby has not forgotten her. And the people who loved her, her mother, her father, her brother, have spent every year since February 14th, 2000 looking for the truth about what happened to their girl. If you have any information about Asha Degree's disappearance, you can contact the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at 704-484-4788 or the FBI Charlotte Field Office at 704-672-6100. Her name was Asha Degree. She was 9 years old, and she deserves an answer.